Today we're beginning chapter 6 of the Mother Book. The first 5 chapters were about how to move into relationship to this principle Sri Aurobindo is describing as the mother. In fact, this, what he is describing, is beyond male or female, mother or father, but it is a way of making this divine principle more accessible. The principle of the mother is the one who nurtures, the one who gives us refuge, the one who loves us just as we are, versus the father, who may be impersonal and distant and strict, relatively speaking. You understand, these are the human distinctions. They do not exist in the spiritual plane except as a reflection of our human embodiment. And since all these planes exist, because humans are embodied, the mother principle does exist. So each chapter is how to move into relationship. And first was the principle of grace and aspiration. The second chapter was the principle of how to collaborate with this grace, how to open ourselves up to it. And the other was to recognize that is the mother who is seeking in us. It is she who does the sadhana, she who does the experiences the aspiration or the longing. It's the very thing itself that we're seeking, that is seeking itself. And the 4th chapter is about the money as a manifesting principle. The 5th chapter, however, is the conclusion of the first 4 chapters. It wraps it up, and it speaks of a complete surrender, a giving over of yourself as a vessel for that divine principle to manifest itself through you into the creation. So then, what's this 6th chapter? What role does it play? It's very similar to the role the 7th chapter and the 13th chapter play in the Gita. In the 6th chapter, you've come to the self, you've come to the being. In the 7th chapter, you begin to see the nature of the condition of the structures of illusion and ego and embodiment. Once you step out of it, then you can perceive the nature of the infrastructure that had your bondage and therefore your freedom from bondage possible. And in the 13th chapter, which is after the merger with God, it's the same principle where the consciousness then comes to a stage and can see, experience, know the fabric and the structure of existence that is occurring endlessly, of which we are a part of. And it begins to reveal its nature to you. And this is particularly what happens to us on the spiritual path. This is what happens. You come to the self and then you expand and you can say, oh, well, look at how the ego runs me. Look at how the ego runs other people. Oh, look at how the people deceive themselves. Look at how the error of ignorance, the error of thinking you know but you don't. You begin to see the context of our embodiment in a broader perspective. The consciousness steps out of its absorption in trying to feel the connection with the self or with God, and starts stepping back from that when it's fulfilled and seeing the larger picture. So here Sri Aurobindo is, the 6th chapter is the beginning of a series of revelations, his revelations, about the nature of the cosmology that we find ourselves in the midst of. And these are actually tangible experiences that can be discovered yourself if your consciousness is inclined to travel into the subtle dimensions. So for me, many of these were revealed. For whatever reason, my awakening took me to each different plane of consciousness regularly, frequently, so that I was seeing in the subtle world the nature of how it all worked. Of course, I saw it in my first awakening where everything was revealed, that I knew it was all purposeful, that I knew there was a structure behind it, but I didn't know the details of it. I didn't know all the intricacies and the awe and wonder, the shock and awe that would occur in the process of meeting these planes of consciousness that we're not able to access because we're so deeply immersed in the sensory world and the mind and our human embodiment that it's not available to us because we're preoccupied. It's all there, but we're preoccupied. But in itself, it's a reflection of two principles. The principles of in the embedded divinity that arises out of matter to awaken to itself, and that always transcendent divinity that never goes anywhere, is eternally there, but descends into the world to assist the embedded divinity to come forward. In my teachings, it's the Sat and the Asat. That which enlivens existence is the same as the underlying, the supreme reality that created existence. One is lost, surrenders itself, loses itself in matter, and the other remains unchanged. And this is the principles carried throughout all duality. This would be the difference between the Purusha and the Prakriti, the ever unchanging Shiva, and the ever manifesting Shakti. So in this chapter, he focuses on the descending manifestation principle from the transcendent into the creation, from the Sat into the creation, and also at some point addresses how that principle of ever free, ever infinite, ever true chose to take on embodiment as a means of knowing itself, manifesting itself. So this is this chapter alone is longer than all of the 5 previous chapters. So we're obviously not going to be able to complete this chapter tonight. However, we will shoot for 1/3. So we have a target. We'll see if we get there. There's a lot of material. But because of the nature of these fields, this quality of this first part, it's revelatory. A revelation isn't something to understand. It's something to get. It's to have. So like poetry, it's not meant to figure out. It's meant to be lifted up by what it implies or points to. And that's the same here, is to allow yourself to just fall into the flow of what is being revealed in this chapter. Okay, so let us begin.
Chapter 6. The 4 powers of the Mother are 4 of her outstanding personalities, portions and embodiments of her divinity, through whom she acts on her creatures, orders and harmonizes her creations in the worlds, and directs the working out of her 1,000 forces. For the Mother is one, but she comes before us with differing aspects. Many are her powers and personalities, many are her emanations and vibhutis that do her work in the universe. The one whom we adore as the Mother is the divine conscious force that dominates all existence, one and yet so many-sided that to follow her movement is impossible even for the quickest mind and for the freest and most vast intelligence. The Mother is the consciousness and force of the Supreme, and far above all she creates. But something of her ways can be seen and felt through her embodiments, and the more sizable because more defined and limited temperament, and action of the goddess, forms in whom she consents to be manifest to her creatures.
Okay. So I call this principle that he's initially describing here as the Supreme Being. That's what I call it. He's calling it the Mother. But the Supreme Being points to a principle of which we all are emanations of. And so does this term, the Mother, in the Mother book, point to. So it's talking about a quality of consciousness, a quality of being that comes into existence immediately after the potentiality of the sought expresses itself. It is the transition from something that does not exist right when it comes into existence. Non-being becomes being. Non-existence becomes existence. Nothingness becomes everything. This condition is the principle of identity, the principle of intelligence, the principle of force, the principle of ultimately independent will, and our own individual sense of self. This being, we are all pieces of the one being. This is so transcendent, so subtle. It too carries within it a huge potentiality for the existence, but it is a different potentiality than the sought, because that is now a possibility. It holds the infinite possibility. The characteristic of this, then, is inexplicably subtle relative to anything we can know, prior to anything that's considered physical. Subatomic particles, dark matter, dark energy, anything to do with physicality. This is subtle, the subtlest of the subtlest of the subtlest. It is not knowable. You can become it, actually you are it, but it's not knowable. It is the source of all potential knowing or experiencing, but in itself it's not knowable. In my teachings, it is the Sat, Chit, Tat, Ananda. Sat being the unmanifest supreme, unspeakable condition, absolute actually. Sat's the absolute, to use the words more precisely. The Tat is everything else. The Chit is the Sat in the Tat. Literally, the Sat becomes the Chit the second it enters the creation, existence. There is no difference between the Chit, which is consciousness, and the Sat, which is absolute, except the Chit exists. It allows isness. This principle, this possibility of things existing comes right at that moment. He uses terms emanations and vibhutis. This he'll repeat throughout this chapter. An emanation is as if an intent. It is a ray of purposefulness in consciousness. It may, and a vibhuti is the form by which it manifests itself. So it is, you could say, the experience of bliss. The emanation is the principle. The bliss is the manifestation of the principle, the vibhuti, the form of the principle. It's the principle of Satchitananda, which he'll mention later. is an emanation. It's a ray. It expresses an intent, a purpose. Actually, there's one emanation of which all other emanations come from. That purposefulness of the existence, that will to be, to experience, to know itself, is the one purpose. And that's the first emanation. And it's the subtlest of the subtlest, but it carries a tremendous power, a tremendous actualizing capacity, even though it takes time for that to actually be expressed, to be recognized. All of this goes on with no witness. All of this is going on right there from the very moment. All the past, all the future is here right now. All that has ever been, everything that has ever been, everything that can be, is here always right now. So we're talking about a timeless principle, one that isn't even infinite. It is beyond the whole structure of creation, of duality, of space and time, causality, cause and effect. Subtlest of subtle. Yet so many-sided that to follow her movements is impossible, even for the quickest mind and for the freest and most vast intelligence. Because it's the quality of intelligence itself. Okay.
There are 3 ways of being of the Mother, of which you can become aware when you enter into touch of oneness with the conscious force that upholds us and the universe. Transcendent, the original Supreme Shakti. She stands above the worlds and links the creation to the ever unmanifest mystery of the Supreme. Universal, the cosmic Mahashakti. She creates all these beings and contains and enters, supports and conducts all these million processes and forces. Individual. She embodies the power of these 2 vaster ways of her existence and makes them living and near to us, and mediates between the human personality and the divine nature.
Okay. So these are 3 ways of being: transcendent, universal, and individual. Transcendent is what was described in the first place. It's not moving. It's not going anywhere. It's eternal, unchanging. Universal is that which manifests all of existence. The universes, space and time, duality, the formation of all the subtle worlds and all the physical worlds, all the content. It is that which includes the formation of matter, the organization of the principle of life, the organization of the principle we call mind, the capacity for action, self-awareness, learning, and evolution. All of these are subsets, and these are the 3 principles. The first, transcendent; the second, the universal; and the third is the individualization, the making of distinctions, the making of duality, the creating of separate particles, the creating of this male and female, attraction and repulsion. All of this is the third expression. They are in space and time. The universal less so, the individual much more so. So, speaking of a universal as a principle, it's speaking of individual as a principle here, not a particular individual, but as a principle of individualization, of universalization. And it's actually experiential. We go through all the planes as one transcends and is able to be conscious, where your unique individuality fades away and you start seeing multiple beings and multiple creations and multiple dimensions of existence. And as you ascend far further, the individual distinctions of those planes begin to be lost in a field of energy and light and bliss. They lose their distinction the higher you go, until all there is this field of light and energy and bliss. So there is no distinction. And he speaks of this more as we travel on. Okay, continue.
Okay. The one original transcendent Shakti, the mother, stands above all the worlds and bears in her eternal consciousness the supreme divine. Alone she harbors the absolute power and the ineffable presence containing or calling the truths that have to be manifested. She brings them down from the mystery in which they were hidden into the light of her infinite consciousness and gives them a form in her omnipotent power and her boundless life and a body in the universe. The Supreme is manifest in her forever as the everlasting Satchitananda, manifested through her in the worlds as the one and dual consciousness of Ishvara Shakti and the dual principle of Purusha Prakriti, embodied by her in the worlds and the planes and the gods and their energies, and figured because of her as all that is in the known worlds and in unknown others. All is her play with the Supreme, all is her manifestation of the mysteries of the eternal, the miracles of the infinite. All is she, for all are parcel and portion of the divine conscious force. Nothing can be here or elsewhere but what she decides and the Supreme sanctions. Nothing can take shape except what she, moved by the Supreme, perceives and forms after casting it into seed in her creating Ananda.
Very good. So he is now describing the transcendent aspect, which he introduced in the first paragraphs. This quality of consciousness, where it carries the potentiality, the manifesting capacity to bring the potentiality of the Absolute into existence. So it's become something else. Now it becomes an unfolding possibility. This possibility isn't something like this being does. It's not anything it does. There's nothing really there. There's not a person or an individuality. It's a principle. It's a principle that expresses what I essentially see as the mechanism of existence. Just like an explosion pushes out heat and light and force, so does the transcendent carries that instantaneous split second right after the explosion, before it has have its impact in the creation. This is what the transcendent mother principle carries. And within that, inherent in that, as in all things, are these organizing principles of duality and space and time that are the foundational principles of existence, and that sets instantaneously a means by which existence can unfold. So this principle of so let's stay just a few words I'd like to say. Alone, she harbors the absolute power and the ineffable presence. Alone. Alone. This is the final realization. This sense that it's all you. There's not alone like lonely, like alone like this is all there is. There is nothing else. And everything that exists derives from that condition of aloneness in this power, in this potentiality, the power of this potentiality. The remarkable thing is this is experiential. Sri Aurobindo is describing something he experienced in a poetic way. I've experienced the same thing. People have had glimpses of this absolute, different levels, depending upon where it comes to. In the individual level, it's the I am that. There's an I that says I'm that. So this principle is the individual expression, but there is an amness that carries inherent this capacity for knowing its amness, but it is not yet an I am. So it's not conscious of it being alone. He's describing something. It's not the experience of what that is. The experience of what that is unspeakable. Power, force, potentiality, unspeakable. No words. Nothing can define it. It's not yet fully developed into duality, where there is something here and something there. So a this and a that. It doesn't exist, in fact, yet. But this is the principle behind it. And as it manifests, as this event occurs, as these principle, which is ever occurring, manifests itself, these qualities are the seed from which emerges everything that can be known, everything that can be experienced. This is the principles of, first, the everlasting Satchitananda. So, Satchitananda represents existence, consciousness, and bliss, or connection, relation. So this principle is the fabric. It is the zero-point energy field from which everything emerges. It at first isn't a Satchitananda, it's a Satchitananda. It's all happening at once. The distinction of Sat from Chit from Ananda has not happened. It carries this huge potentiality as all at once, those three principles existing together at the same time. And as you progress spiritually, experientially, this is it. If your path has been bliss, the bliss becomes fierce and more fierce. It becomes uncomfortable. It becomes burning. It becomes just this pure, radiant quality of consciousness. And if it's just consciousness, well, then that consciousness very quickly really comes to that glimpse of that absolute, but then collapses back into the experience, the ananda of existence, and then begins in its process to experience the ananda that existence actually is. This is how the Supreme, the Transcendent, gets to experience itself through its universal and individual expressions. So the Ishvara Shakti. Ishvara is the Lord. The Shakti is the expression of the Lord. These are just words. Purusha Prakriti. The Ishvara would be comparable to the Purusha. The Shakti would be comparable to the Prakriti. The Purusha is that ever unchanging principle. The Shakti is that manifesting, ever unfolding principle. So these are organizations, principles that came into existence stepping down out of an emanation, as emanations and or vibhutis of this original transcendent state. Okay, let's continue.
The Mahashakti, the Universal Mother, works out whatever is transmitted by her transcendent consciousness from the Supreme and enters into the worlds that she has made. Her presence fills and supports them with the divine spirit and the divine, all-sustaining force and delight without which they could not exist. That which we call nature or Prakriti is only her most outward executive aspect. She marshals and arranges the harmony of her forces and processes, impels the operations of nature, and moves among them, secret or manifest, in all that can be seen or experienced, or put into motion of life. Each of the worlds is nothing but one play of the Mahashakti of that system of worlds or universe, who is there as the cosmic soul and personality of the Transcendent Mother. Each is something that she has seen in her vision, gathered into her heart of beauty and power, and created in her Ananda.
The Mahashakti is the principle of God. it is the most transcendent expression of the God, becoming more and more accessible. This is why Jesus said there was the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Thus, Father is this unspeakable transcendent principle here in the Mother Book called the Mother, and the Son is the daughter, which is the Divine Mother that brings the daughter, that brings the Divine Mother into existence, making it accessible, available to us in ways that wouldn't be available as just in her transcendent state. So she acts as an intermediary, something accessible, something we can pray to, something that we can feel and echo, because the transcendent Mother is so beyond our ability to know. It's so unspeakable. So this is our avenue. It is also from that principle of the Universal Divine Mother is this the avenue by which creation organized. It organized in a beneficent way because the organizing principle carried with it Ananda, interconnectedness, the delight of being, the pleasure of being, the capacity for knowing, and Chit, this force, this will, the expression of the purpose of the potentiality as it comes into actuality. This endless creative unfolding of the creation, the exploding of the polyphora of universes, and within those universes, stars and galaxies and matter and structures of existence, electromagnetic fields, gravity, all of these principles science points to, is actually pointing to the emanations and the vibhutis of the Divine Mother manifesting through this universal principle of the Mother. And it is this she carries the mystery. So the mystery is that which we cannot possibly know yet. It is something that in chance is hinted at, is hidden behind veils at every stage of the spiritual journey. It's that hinting of something that's veiled. Just if something is fully seen, it's no longer hidden. The mystery is what's not fully seen. And what has us be curious about the mystery is the will of the Supreme to actualize itself, to know, to experience, to wake up. So it wants to reveal it wants to know everything that's mysterious. So what is the mysterious points to? It's all that possibility that has not yet been able to be accessible to us. It's not darkness and hidden danger or threat. This is what ego does with the mystery. It is just that which has yet to be revealed to us. That which is not yet known. Sensed, but not known. So she carries this allure. The divinity, all the divinities, all the vibhutis carry this allure. Right? A woman clothes herself rather than being completely naked. And it creates allure. So this allure is what the divine universal principle has. And it's what draws us. This is the Ananda, that the beauty, the splendor, the nobility, the vastness, the greatness, the subtlety. This is what pulls us to know, to experience, to grow out of our limited capacities for knowing the mysteries into expanded and expanded arenas of capacities for knowing and experiencing. She holds these worlds. Everything in these worlds are hers. Her emanations, her vibhutis, all the gods and goddesses, all from the highest to the lowest, the most mischievous, the most nasty, the most obscure, they're all hers. Okay.
But there are many planes of her creation, many steps of the divine Shakti. At the summit of this manifestation of which we are a part, there are worlds of infinite existence, consciousness, force, and bliss, over which the Mother stands as the unveiled eternal power. All beings there live and move in an ineffable completeness and unalterable oneness, because she carries them safe in her arms forever. Near to us are the worlds of a perfect supramental creation, in which the Mother is the supramental Mahashakti, a power of divine, omniscient will and omnipotent knowledge, always apparent in its unfailing works and spontaneously perfect in every process. There, all movements are the steps of the truth. There, all beings are souls and powers and bodies of the divine light. There, all experiences are seas and floods and waves of an intense and absolute Ananda. But here where we dwell are the worlds of the ignorance, worlds of mind and life and body, separated in consciousness from their source, of which this earth is a significant center, and its evolution a crucial process. This too, with all its obscurity and struggle and imperfection, is upheld by the Universal Mother. This too is impelled and guided to its secret aim by the Mahashakti.
So here it is. These are the planes, the transcendent, the absolute. In awareness, it's this enormous sense of spacious presence. Then there is the more what he's calling the supramental dimension, where there is infinite. Take it back. First there is the transcendent. Then there is the Satchitananda, the domains of Satchitananda, where there's ineffable bliss, never ending, never changing, always at the source of that ineffable Satchitananda. And the beings that live there have no personality. The consciousness that travels through those domains has to have come to the earth consciousness, to become individualized, to even know those domains exist. There is nothing in them that wants to know anything. They are so saturated in this endless and ineffable quality of being that there is no turning to anything material, anything mental, anything that would define separation or suffering. None of that exists. These are the heavens and the transcendent domains that go beyond the God plane. They're beyond the planes of those emanations and vibhutis that we call the gods. So it's describing domains that are beyond the planes of the God. When you go there, there's nowhere to go. These would be the samadhis. This would be the beginning of the samadhis. When these occurred to me, what I experienced before the samadhi started was everything that was in the plane of the gods or of the Satchitananda, the planes of Satchitananda. So, but when the final samadhis came, it was unspeakable. And I was absorbed beyond time. I stopped and the time moved. And when I came out, it was days later. It was, you cut to the source, there is no time. Time starts occurring as you descend down into existence. So much time goes by, relatively speaking, as you ascend higher and higher and higher. That's why when you go into a deep state of meditation, much more time goes by than you expected. Oh my God, what happened to that hour and a half? It was gone. It's because you had transcended into a state, a position in the planes of consciousness where time does not rule so absolutely. Time is not so distinct. So it's a timeless dimension. And what brings one out is because one's still in a body. If one wasn't, if I wasn't a Westerner and there's many people in India, they would just disappear. They drop the body. The body would go on without anybody there. And then stop working. But this is in a Western system, we're so embodied. It will always pull us Westerners back into our body. I like to say Indians, you could slap an Indian, they leave their body, but at a Westerner, you have to run them over a few times before they're willing to leave their body. We are so attached to our material existence in our mind that when these states come, this attachment structure so subtle and so hardwired into the nervous system that it pulls us out of these states. But the advantage of it is these states come with us when we enter back into the body. And then the body becomes the vessel that can take that force and have yourself be able to experience it in your distinct individualized consciousness, which you can't do when you're there. Sri Aurobindo speaks much of the perfect supramental creation. So the nature of the supramental creation is an automatic expression of this consciousness into the domain of duality, but with no tamas and rajas. It's pure sattva. And therefore there is no resistance. There is no struggle. The bodies don't die. There is no need for food. The quality of consciousness is in the radiant background of the transcendent, is always visible in every particle of that domain that one's living in. Every tree, every leaf, every flower, the air itself radiates this quality of that transcendent Satchitananda. So we are always in harmony, always in collaboration. All our actions, without effort, are perfect relative to what needs to be manifested or brought forward. Now, so far, this supramental creation has not had its counterpart on the physical planet, but it has its counterpart in the higher heavens. In the higher heavens, you will see people living in a material context. Flowers, gardens, buildings, oceans, sun, sky, and they are in continuous bliss. Everything is bliss. It's the sattvic heavens. Now those fade away as one progresses, and the boundaries between the tree and the sky and the ocean become irrelevant in the field of energy, but in the supramental domain there is still actions. And you can watch people interact and talk and even communicate with you, and they are perfectly content in their domain. They don't have a rajas principle. They're not motivated to manifest in themselves. This is why Sri Aurobindo is trying to bring the supramental down, because then it would take on the rajas and tamas and would transmute them into means of manifesting and creating a new kind of matter, a new kind of existence than one that has been possible up to now. But where we dwell, this is the shit plane, right? This is where everything goes wrong. This is the counter aspect to these divine principles, which allow distinction, which allow for an up there has to be a down, for a high there has to be a low. It allows, of course, these are concurrent creations. They're not, he's describing them progressively as a descent, but the fact is that it's actually both being created in an evolution in the darkness of matter simultaneously with a descent from above. It's this polarity between the absolute, which is embedded in matter, and the absolute, which is always transcendent. And between these two comes existence. So this descending down the plane from the transcendent into the asat, into the dimension of the embodied absolute, is this coming into the Holocaust, coming into the unworkability, coming into the darkness, unconsciousness, right? First superconsciousness, then conscious, then subconscious, then unconscious. All consciousness. And even Sri Aurobindo used the term inconscient, below unconscious. Just a complete inert condition of consciousness. These all can be experienced. When here in this middle zone where us human beings exist, where we're on the threshold between these dark and light domains, the quality of consciousness that can be developed can be the traveler, can be the knower, can be the experiencer for the transcendent and for the universal to know itself. And through us, it is able to continue to perfect its endless unfolding of the potentiality of existence through each of us. So we are that. We're tools and instruments of that. Our bodies and our personalities came from this embodied, inconscient, unconscious, subconscious, barely conscious, more conscious, transcendent conscious, superconscious, so on and so forth states. We're the ones that get to experience this existence. And as that, we are the emanation of the vibhutis, of the divine, in terms of it knowing itself. Until human beings came into existence, everything I'm describing was automatic. There wasn't anybody in charge. These are principles. They're energy forces that carry inherent with them the structures that create the fabric of existence as it can be known. They become distinct the more they descend. The gods have a form of self-awareness, but they don't have an individuality. They have an intelligence and they have a will, but they don't have an individuality. The individuality doesn't come until suffering can occur. The self-awareness of the individual expression of matter, the thing that makes self-awareness possible, is suffering. Or you could say concurrently with self-awareness is suffering, and concurrently with suffering is emerging self-awareness. Consciousness wakes up from matter through pain and through suffering. Doesn't sound like a happy story, but we've all lived this. We all have lived this. And then we've lived it for so long that now we've come to a place in relationship to suffering that is no longer seeming to be suffering. The suffering has become less proportional to what we would call not suffering. Purposefulness, aliveness, happiness. Any of these could be expressions of that emerging quality of consciousness when it wakes up and then begins to move into alignment with its transcendent origins. But here where we dwell, of which Earth is a significant center. I mean, I can't say there isn't a bias here, right? Sri Aurobindo was born on this planet, I was born on this planet, so there's probably there's a bias here. I am certain that if it's happened here, it's happened elsewhere. Otherwise, it's a lot of wasted space. Right? It is actually being replicated in forms and different forms. And because I've met beings from other dimensions and other planets who are embodied, I happen to know it's the fact, even though I have not actually seen these worlds directly. Maybe I have, and I could have mistaken them for subtle world visions, but that is yet to be known. So, it's not only that Earth is a significant center, each of us are significant centers. The fact that we have individual self-awareness, intelligence, will, capacity to create, to discriminate, to learn, to grow. This is what makes us a significant center. Okay.
The mother, as the Mahashakti of this triple world of the ignorance, stands in an intermediate plane between the supramental light, the truth life, the truth creation, which has to be brought down here, and this mounting and descending hierarchy of planes of consciousness that, like a double ladder, laps into the nescience of matter and climb back again through the flowering of life and soul and mind into the infinity of the spirit, determining all that shall be in this universe and in the terrestrial evolution by which she sees and feels and pours from her. She stands there above the gods, and all her powers and personalities are put out in front of her for the action, and she sends down emanations of them into these lower worlds to intervene, to govern, to battle and conquer, to lead and turn their cycles, to direct the total and the individual lines of their forces. These emanations are the many divine forms and personalities in which men have worshipped her under different names throughout the ages. But also she prepares and shapes through these powers and their emanations the minds and bodies of her vibhutis, even as she prepares and shapes minds and bodies for the vibhutis of the Ishvara, that she may manifest in the physical world and in the disguise of the human consciousness some ray of her power and quality and presence. All the scenes of the earth play have been like a drama, arranged and planned and staged by her, with the cosmic gods for her assistants, and herself as a veiled actor.
So this is the universal Mahashakti. She not only governs all these transcendent planes, she is also the reconciler of that which is emerging from the undeveloped aspects of the creation. She builds a link between that which is low and that which is high. She's the one that orchestrates this entire evolving, ever-changing, unspeakably vast, impossible to know fully, planes of consciousness. So the nature, and he's also here defining this more specifically, what is a vibhuti and what is an emanation. An emanation we would call a city or a power. We end up being the recipient of that particular capacity that gives us a unique ability in the creation as people. Insight, intuition, the ability to create, the ability to master a complicated or difficult task. These emanations can be evoked. We can open ourselves and become recipients of these powers, these emanations. And then through us, this Mahashakti will express some aspects and component from a low vibration to a high vibration, depending upon the design of our system. So these are all the powers and enchantments. The ability to love is a city. The ability to love God is a city. The ability to know what someone is thinking is a city. The ability to leave your body and travel into the subtle world is a city. The ability to speak like I speak is a city. I'm literally just a channel for the emanations. I'm not a vibhuti. I don't believe I am. I'm not a vibhuti. So these emanations are really something that comes through us as we as human beings purify our system and open our system up. Some of these are given, some of these arise because of the necessity of the manifestation of the evolving soul. Their particular unique role there to play will be tempered by the nature of their personality and their environment, how their Dharma organized them, how successfully they were able to go through the stages of their own development. Many of these emanations come spontaneously. Some will come because of the necessity of the manifestation. And it will become more and more perfectly expressed through the form, the more and more it is used. So, and what are these emanations? Just as there are in the human life, there is emanations in the godlike or the subtle world, where there are beings that live in the subtle world, literally do not ever take birth, or have not anyway up to now taken birth. And they too can channel the Mahashakti's force into those dimensions. And they, being a channel, a source channel from the Mahashakti, then can have their own vibhutis in these subtle worlds that will take and distribute that to lesser vibhutis in the subtle world, all the way down to human beings. So there's this huge hierarchy, this huge unfolding. It's all purposeful. It all, even though it may seem chaotic and diverse, and there's dark and light forces, and there's conflicts and their battles, and there's changes and cycles, all of this is purposeful. And therefore there is this descending action as this force from the Transcendent comes to the Mahashakti integration, which he's describing, but concurrently there's this evolving, unfolding action that's also part of this same emerging. And just as it is above, so below. So there are emanations or vibhutis of darkness in the subtle universal unconscious that are also manifesting in a alternate plane of gods. The demons and the asuras, the vested structures of identity that are locked up into matter, into survival, into existence, into greed, lust, and anger that we experience as human beings, savagery and cruelty. They're also ordering principles that keep these engaged in order to, one, sustain the possibility of these dark dimensions that allow for the earth to exist, and push this movement of evolution, move this coming out from a less conscious to a more conscious state. We can have vibhutis work from either dimension. When we're angry, when we're selfish, when we feel betrayed or resentful or vengeful, these are vibhutis. We are unwittingly channels. When we become lustful, when we become addicted, when we have craving, these are all vibhutis of these dark dimensions of the domains of embodiment. Hatred, bigotry, cruelty, selfishness. These are, we think of them, because we're civilized, as being negative forces. But in fact, there are also necessary expressions of the creation. The Mahashakti holds them all. They're all emanations of her. There is no good and evil in the ultimate position the Mahashakti holds. These distinctions only become apparent when we become self-aware and we begin the process of waking up. Otherwise, there's just existence. There's just survival. There's just getting what you want and avoiding what you don't want. Otherwise, we're in ignorance. It's only when you come out that we begin to suffer the stress, the struggle between the part of us that's still evolving and the part of us that's opening up to something greater. Okay, let's continue.
The mother not only governs all from above, but she descends into this lesser triple universe. Impersonally, all things here, even the movements of the ignorance, are her self-unveiled power, and her creations in diminished substance, her nature body and nature force, and they exist because, moved by the mysterious fiat of the Supreme to work out something that was there in the possibilities of the infinite, she has consented to the great sacrifice and has put on, like a mask, the soul and forms of the ignorance. But personally, too, she has stooped to descend here into the darkness that she may lead it to the light, into the falsehood and error that she may convert it to the truth, into this death that she may turn it to godlike life, into this world pain and its obstinate sorrow and suffering, that she may end it in the transforming ecstasy of her sublime Ananda.
So this is the wonder. Divine lives in the shit. It lives in the worst. It lives in the darkness. It lives in the brutality. And what she consents to do this, to suffer this tension, this obscurity, this limitation, is in each of us. The suffering that we experience is the Mahashakti experiencing itself as you. The Mahashakti is the one that allows us to suffer. It is that suffering which allows us to align ourselves with the higher evolving possibility that matter carried as a potentiality in its obscurity, in its inconscience, in its unconscious, in its subconscious. So we are all emanations. Our individuality that becomes self-aware and starts struggling, starts experiencing conflict, starts becoming neurotic, starts having addictions and rages and temper tantrums. This is all the mother suffering through us. This perception actually becomes available to you when you reach a certain state. You can see the perfection of it all. That there is nothing to be excluded, that everything is to be included, allowed to be, because it's all necessary in this huge unfolding, this double matrix that allows for the creation to continue, to bring what is above below, and to bring up from what's below above. And this is the evolution. This is existence. Without this, there would be no creation. We would not exist. There would be nothing. Sometimes she sends vibhutis. Sometimes she's the emanation that comes into one of us, where we are inspired in our mission to not only meet the darkness in ourselves, but to help meet the darkness in others or in the world. That motive would be an emanation of this Mahashakti, expressing itself through us, seeking to assist in this evolutionary movement. She descends into the darkness for the purpose of leading it to the light. When we become capable of accepting our own darkness, the part of us that can accept our own darkness, instead of resist it and oppose it, try to fix it, make it go away, once we accept it, we take on the responsibility of why it was there in the first place, why we could see it in the first place. And we begin to learn how to be darkness eater. We learn how to be with poison. We learn how to be with the poison that exists within ourselves, but it only appears that way because the poison that exists in the universal is manifesting itself in each one of us. Some of us have a greater role to play, a greater capacity, and so therefore the emanation is more powerful, and with that usually becomes a more acute capacity for experiencing suffering first, and of being able to hold suffering. The greater the capacity for suffering, the greater the capacity to be with suffering. Being with suffering transmutes it. Why is it transmuted? Because suffering is always due to lesser states of consciousness. When we're able to be with it, we bring the light of our consciousness that can be with it, and we allow for that darkness to become the light, to be recognized. When suffering becomes recognized, it becomes something other than suffering. It may have the same symptoms, but for the person who's experienced it becomes something else. Eventually, it becomes pure Satchitananda. Suffering and pain are just Satchitananda that we haven't been able to tolerate. The nervous system hasn't been able to tolerate. The cultural conditioning doesn't know how to tolerate it. It's all those experiences the human developing civilized human being has been suppressing because it didn't know how to be with it. Okay, continue.
In her deep and great love for her children, she has consented to put on herself the cloak of this obscurity, condescended to bear the attacks and torturing influences of the powers of the darkness and the falsehood, born to pass through the portals of the birth that is a death, taken upon herself the pangs and sorrows and sufferings of the creation, since it seemed that thus alone could it be lifted to the light and joy and truth and eternal life. This is the great sacrifice, called sometimes the sacrifice of the Purusha, but much more deeply the Holocaust of Prakriti, the sacrifice of the Divine Mother.
The principle of the mother is sacrifice. This capacity and willingness to sacrifice, to bring into existence life, to preserve life, to protect life. That principle is the expression of the Mahashakti in every woman and in every man who seeks to protect life and to secure itself, secure the family, secure the community. Every person who's inspired by every noble cause, every opportunity to go beyond itself, brings forward this enormous, powerful capacity of sacrifice. And who do we admire? Who do we respect? Who do we build statues to? Are people, not always, but people who have represented that sacrifice. This is the highest expression of the human being. It is the Divine Mother principle in us that allows us to sacrifice, to go beyond our limited existence of consciousness and to expand our ability to be in those dimensions of existence that the rest of humanity has not learned to be with yet. When we find this in ourselves, we find this nobility. We begin to become, the ego starts bowing to the divinity that we are. The person of us begins to sense this quality and capacity of nobility that we carry. This is then the Divine Mother is making herself articulate in you. And you are becoming a more and more perfect instrument for her manifesting principle, an emanation of that principle of Satchitananda in your body, in your vital, in your mind, in your speech, in your action. Now, of course, there is this principle. Sometimes the mother comes embodied. It could be embodied as Christ, as a man. It's not a male or female thing. It can be embodied as a woman. And it comes for the universal. They come as the avatars. They come as the incarnations. They become the saints. They become the teachers and the gurus, the ones, the shining lights that are the beacons for the possibilities of the emerging consciousness. It's what religions were organized for, is to keep the evolving consciousness focused to the higher. Because it's not always possible to know these vibhutis. And in times previous to now, it was very rare to know personally of vibhutis. Even when Christ was on the world, only a relatively small number of people got to know them or even know of him while he was alive. So in the in the evolving structures of civilization has been this trying to bring people, to hold people to a higher possibility of being than the animal conditions, the reactivity, the fear, the negativity, the control of our lesser states of being. This has been what has had all of civilization evolve. So when we see people coming forward like what's occurring now, where people are moving into separation and bigotry and fear and violence and anger and cruelty, this is due to the resistance of the obscurities, the unconscious, the less developed consciousness, and through the emanations of the people who are the expressions of those, often unconsciously, into the world, trying to bring the world back into a lesser state of consciousness. This battle is endless. The battle between the evolving possibility and this devolving inclination. And the inclination to evolve is easier. It's got a long billion-year history behind it, while this transcendent quality is still new, still forming, still not fully grounded. It's easier to do bad than to do good. It's easier to get lazy. It's easier to indulge yourself. It's easier to be resentful. It's easier to judge. It's easier to say, screw them all. It's easier to be your mother, be your father. It's easier to just fall into the trap of the inertia of your activity and the emotions and the preferences of the body and the negativities of the mind. It's easier to choose to be higher, to choose to be good, is really why human beings are on this planet. We're actually here to serve the Mahashakti, to lift the world by our choices. Okay.
You want me to continue?
4 great aspects.
You want me to go ahead with that?
Yes.
Okay. 4 great aspects of the mother. 4 of her leading powers and personalities have stood in front in her guidance of this universe and her dealings with the terrestrial play. 1 is her personality of calm wideness and comprehending wisdom, and tranquil benignity and inexhaustible compassion and sovereign and surpassing majesty and all-ruling greatness. Another embodies her power of splendid strength and irresistible passion, her warrior mood, her overwhelming will, her impetuous swiftness and world-shaking force. A third is vivid and sweet and wonderful, with her deep secret of beauty and harmony and fine rhythm, her intricate and subtle opulence, her compelling attraction and captivating grace. The 4th is equipped with her close and profound capacity of intimate knowledge and careful, flawless work and quiet and exact perfection in all things. Wisdom, strength, harmony, perfection are their several attributes, and it is these powers that they bring with them into the world, manifest in a human disguise in their vibhutis, and shall found in the divine degree of their ascension in those who can open their earthly nature to the direct and living influence of the Mother. To the 4 we give the 4 great names: Mahashwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, Mahasaraswati.
Now this gets personal. Now this is the individual. Remember in the beginning of this chapter, it was the transcendent, the universal, and the individual. This domain of the individual has 4 manifestations that echo the transcendent, echo the Mahashakti. And they have a more specific function because they're here in the dimensions of the security. You're in the dimension of the struggle and the battling of the emerging consciousness. So first is this principle of this great transcendent wisdom, untouched by the perpetrations and the cycles and the events of life. This one who can ride over the top of it and see the purpose in the long view. The one who is not touched by these disturbances and these unexpected situations, who is detached, objective, can see its place in the order of things. The transcendent. This is the Mahashwari. Second is the Mahakali. This is quite different. This is when the force of the transcendent comes in to intervene, where the Mahashwari is Sattvic. The Mahakali is Rajasic. It comes to destroy that which is in the way of the transformation, the transmutation, the evolving purpose of the creation. Comes in with qualities which we'll talk about in our next session. Fierce, intense, the principle of Kali. The third is Mahalakshmi. This is the bliss. This is the sattva tamas. This is the loving, caring, compassionate, attractive beauty. When it comes, all stress, all misery, all suffering dissipates. And all you want to do is rest in the bliss of the Mahalakshmi when she comes. And the quality of the Mahalakshmi is an emanation and a vibhuti. This emanation, this bliss, this ananda, this radiant peace and happiness, this is an emanation. And those that can carry the Shakti, the the Mahalakshmi Shakti, they are loved. They're seen as mothers. People are drawn to them irresistibly, as like magnets, because it represents that principle of Satchitananda. Some are consciously vibhutis, like Amma. Amma is a vibhuti. She was not a person. She's bringing this Mahalakshmi into the creation. I assure you, she doesn't just use her Mahalakshmi. She's got her Mahashwari, Mahakali, and Mahaswaraswati perfectly available to her. And ultimately, all four of these will develop if one actually engages in manifestation. So we open our earthly nature to these capacities as we purify our system and as we're willing to go into the battlefield, the cauldron of this dimension of unworkability. And then finally the Shwaraswati. This is the patient exactitude, the perfection, this constant demand for greater perfection, which hammers the tamas and restrains the rajas in order to create a more perfect ordering in the manifestation of this supreme possibility. Okay. So this is where we'll complete this talk tonight. The next talk will go into great depth into the nature of these four emanations or four vibhutis of the divine Mahashakti. Okay, good. So the nature of revelation is it leaves its impact on you. It imbues something of what is being revealed into your psychic body, into your subtle body, to whatever extent you're open, so that it's a felt experience. The personality may not make sense of it. The mind may not understand it. The body may even not be able to feel it, or may not be able to hold it. But the impression of the revelation is to manifest itself. Revelations are always Vibhuti's expression of that divine purpose of which the Mahashakti represents. And therefore she implants herself through these kinds of conversations into each who can hear this, feel it, experience it, understand it. All right, let's finish with the meditation. But first, let's bow to the Mahashakti that has entered the room and that has woken up or spoken in most of you, and those who listen or watch this in the future. Let's bow to that in recognition of that sacred principle that has come forward. Namaste.